r/MaliciousCompliance. Dad called me cheap for $500 gift, so I destroyed him. Cheap and pathetic. Those were the exact words my father used to describe my $500 gift card in front of 23 members of our extended family at his 62nd birthday party. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt my face burn with humiliation as every conversation in the room ground to a halt. I stood there holding my wine glass, watching him wave the Best Buy gift card dismissively while gesturing toward the pile of expensive presents my wealthy cousins had brought. "Look at this," he announced, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment I'd heard my entire life. "My son, the hotshot software engineer, making six figures, and this is what I get." Meanwhile, Jenny got me a new iPad and Marcus bought me that leather recliner. The silence was deafening. Aunt Carol shifted uncomfortably. Uncle Pete suddenly found his shoes fascinating. My cousins, the same ones who I knew for a fact made less than half my salary but had wealthy parents backing them, avoided eye contact entirely. But Dad wasn't done. "You know what this tells me?" He held up the gift card like it was contaminated. "It tells me my own son doesn't think I'm worth the effort. Couldn't even be bothered to pick out something personal. Just grabbed a gift card on the way over, probably from the grocery store checkout." That last part stung because it wasn't even remotely true. I'd spent hours researching what to get him, knowing he'd been complaining about his ancient computer setup. $500 was a significant chunk of my monthly budget after all my expenses he knew nothing about, apparently. "Dad, I thought you'd want to pick out what you actually needed," I started, but he cut me off with a bitter laugh. "What I need is a son who doesn't treat his father like an afterthought." His eyes swept across the room, ensuring he had maximum audience for his performance. "Honestly, I'm embarrassed. After everything I did raising you, sacrificing for your education, this is the thanks I get." My hands were shaking now, and I set down my wine before I dropped it. 28 years old, and he could still make me feel like that awkward, never good enough kid who couldn't earn his approval no matter what I accomplished. Summa cum laude from a prestigious university. About time you applied yourself. Dream job at a Fortune 500 company. Don't let it go to your head. Buying my own house at 26. Must be nice to have it so easy. But this was different. This was public humiliation, designed to make me look like a selfish, ungrateful son in front of people whose opinions I cared about. People who had no idea what really went on between us, who didn't know the full story of our relationship or my finances. "You know what, Dad?" I said quietly, and something in my tone made him pause mid-rant. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "You're absolutely right." He looked momentarily confused, like he'd been expecting more of a fight. "I have been cheap," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "Absolutely pathetic, really. And it's time I did something about that." I pulled out my phone, and I saw his brow furrow as he watched me scroll through my banking app. He had no idea what was coming, but I could see the first flicker of uncertainty cross his face. "Thanks for opening my eyes, Dad. This has been really educational." The family was about to get an education too. I kept scrolling through my phone, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Dad's confusion was morphing into something that looked almost like concern, but I knew him well enough to recognize it was really just annoyance that his dramatic moment was being upstaged. "What are you doing?" he demanded, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Put that thing away. We're having a family discussion." "Oh, we absolutely are," I said, still not looking up from my screen. "In fact, I think this is exactly the kind of transparency our family needs." Aunt Carol cleared her throat nervously. "Maybe we should." "No, please stay," I interrupted, finally making eye contact with her, then sweeping my gaze across the room. "Dad's right. I have been keeping secrets about money, and that's not fair to any of you." I could see Mom in my peripheral vision, standing frozen by the kitchen doorway with a serving platter in her hands. She knew my tone, knew that look on my face. She'd seen it exactly twice before in my life, once when I was 12 and finally snapped at the neighborhood bully, and once in college when I'd had enough of my roommate's lies. Both times, the aftermath had been spectacular. "Sit down, son." "You're being dramatic," Dad said, but there was something different in his voice now. Less confident. "Dramatic?" I laughed, and it sounded harsh even to my own ears. "You want to talk about dramatic? Let's talk about your performance just now. The wounded father, sacrificed everything, ungrateful son routine. That was quite a show." Jenny, my cousin with the iPad buying money, was looking between Dad and me like she was watching a tennis match. Marcus had gone completely pale, probably sensing the family dynamics were about to shift in ways none of us could take back. "You want to know what's really pathetic, Dad?" I continued, my finger hovering over my banking app. "What's pathetic is that I've been enabling this behavior for 3 years. What's pathetic is that I've been so desperate for your approval that I've let you humiliate me over and over again, all while." "That's enough," Mom's voice cut through the room like a whip crack. She'd set down the platter and was walking toward us. "Both of you, stop this right now." But I was done listening to people tell me to stop, to be quiet, to just take it. Done being the reasonable one while everyone else got to have their feelings and opinions about my life. "No, Mom." He wanted to discuss my financial priorities in front of everyone, so let's discuss them. I held up my phone. "I've got 3 years of bank statements right here. 3 years of transactions that paint a very interesting picture of just how cheap I really am." Dad's face was cycling through emotions now, anger, confusion, and something that might have been the first hint of real fear. Because he was starting to remember things, I could see it in his eyes. Starting to add up numbers he'd been very careful not to think about too hard. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't I?" I smiled, and it felt sharp as broken glass. "Uncle Pete, you work in accounting, right? You're good with numbers." Pete nodded slowly, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "Perfect. I think our family could use an objective third party to help us understand what cheap really looks like." The room held its collective breath as I turned my phone screen toward them. "Let's start with the basics," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Dad, remind everyone what you told them about your financial situation when you moved into the apartment downtown last year." His jaw tightened. That's private family business. Oh, now it's private. I laughed bitterly. Funny how that works. My gift giving was fair game for public commentary, but your finances are off limits. Uncle Pete was leaning forward now, his accountant's curiosity clearly piqued despite the family drama unfolding. Aunt Carol had her hand pressed to her chest like she was bracing for impact. Answer the question, Dad. What did you tell everyone about your rent situation? The silence stretched until Cousin Jenny finally spoke up. He said the veterans' benefits covered most of it, and he was doing fine on his disability payments. Right. I snapped my fingers. Doing fine. Completely independent. That's the story. I scrolled through my banking app with deliberate slowness. So I'm sure everyone will be really interested to learn about these monthly transfers. Let's see. January through March of this year alone. Stop it, Dad said, his voice low and dangerous. You're embarrassing yourself. Am I? I looked around the room. Because I think the embarrassing part was letting my own father lie to our entire family while I funded his lifestyle and got called cheap for my trouble. Mom had gone white as a sheet. What transfers? And there it was. The moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Because Mom didn't know. She knew I helped Dad occasionally, but she didn't know the scope. Dad had sworn me to secrecy, said it would hurt her pride to know how much he was struggling, said it would cause problems in their already strained relationship. $800 a month, I said clearly, watching Dad's face crumble. Every month for 3 years. That's $28,800, for those keeping track at home. The numbers hit the room like a bomb. I heard Aunt Carol gasp. Uncle Pete muttered something under his breath that sounded like, Jesus Christ. That's not, Dad started, then stopped, because there was no way to finish that sentence. It wasn't what? It wasn't true. It wasn't supposed to come out like this. Wait, there's more, I continued, on a roll now and unable to stop. Emergency car repairs last summer, $1,200. The hospital bills from your back surgery that insurance didn't cover, $2,400. Oh, and my personal favorite, the loan for Christmas gifts last year so you could look generous in front of everyone. How much was that again, Dad? He was staring at me with something approaching horror, finally understanding that I'd kept meticulous records of everything. That his financial house of cards was about to collapse in front of the very people he'd been trying to impress. $1,500, I answered my own question. For Christmas gifts. Including, ironically enough, that expensive watch you gave Uncle Pete. Pete looked down at his wrist like the watch had suddenly turned into a snake. So let's do some math, I said, my voice gaining momentum. Monthly support, emergency funds, medical bills, Christmas money. We're looking at well over $35,000 in the last 3 years. From your cheap son who gives pathetic gifts. The room was dead silent except for the grandfather clock and someone's shaky breathing. But you're right, Dad, I said, finally lowering my phone. $500 really is pathetic. It's pathetic that I thought it was enough. It's pathetic that I've been subsidizing your pride while you humiliated me. I looked around the room one more time, seeing the shock, the confusion, the dawning understanding on everyone's faces. Well, good news. I'm done being pathetic. The silence that followed felt like it could suffocate us all. Dad's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound was coming out. Mom had sunk into the nearest chair, her face cycling through expressions I'd never seen before, shock, hurt, confusion, and something that might have been betrayal. $35,000, Uncle Pete repeated slowly, like he was testing how the number sounded. In 3 years. Give or take, I said, my adrenaline starting to ebb and leave something cold and hollow in its place. I stopped calculating after it became clear that no amount would ever be enough to earn basic respect. That's when Dad found his voice again, and when he did, it came out as a roar. You ungrateful little shit. He lunged forward, and for a moment I thought he might actually take a swing at me. How dare you air our private business like this? How dare you try to make me look like? Like what? I cut him off. Like exactly what you are. Tom, sit down, Mom's voice was sharp enough to stop him mid-stride. She was staring at him with an expression I'd never seen her wear before. Sit down right now. But Dad was in full meltdown mode, 3 years of carefully maintained lies crashing down around him. This is what I get. I asked my son for help during the hardest period of my life, and he throws it in my face the first time. The first time. I laughed, and it sounded slightly hysterical even to me. Dad, you've been throwing my failures in my face since I was old enough to disappoint you. The only difference is now everyone gets to see the math. Cousin Marcus, who'd been silent through this entire exchange, suddenly stood up. Okay, I think maybe we should all just. No. The voice came from Mom, and it was steel wrapped in silk. Nobody's leaving. Not yet. She turned to Dad with eyes I'd only seen her use on telemarketers and door-to-door salesmen. Thomas. Explain to me how our son has been giving you $800 a month, and I didn't know about it. And there it was. The question I'd been dreading, because I'd been complicit in the lie. Dad had asked me not to tell her, said it would complicate their already rocky relationship, said she'd feel guilty that he needed help. Like an idiot, I believed him. Sarah, it's not what it looks like, Dad started, his anger deflating into something more desperate. I was going to tell you, but you've been so stressed with work, and I didn't want. $800, Thomas. Every month. For 3 years. Mom's voice was getting quieter, which anyone who knew her recognized as a very bad sign. While I'd been clipping coupons and buying generic everything because you told me we needed to be careful with money. Oh shit. I hadn't thought about that part. Hadn't considered what it meant that Dad was taking my money while watching Mom sacrifice. And the medical bills, she continued, standing up slowly. You told me the payment plan was manageable. You said you had it handled. Aunt Carol made a small noise that might have been a whimper. Jenny and Marcus were staring at their phones like they could disappear into them. Uncle Pete was still looking at his watch, the watch I'd apparently bought him through Dad's deception. I did have it handled, Dad said weakly. I found a way to handle it. By lying to both of us, I said, the full scope of his manipulation finally hitting me. You lied to her about the money, and you lied to me about why you needed it. What else? Mom's voice cut through the room like a blade. She was looking at Dad with the expression of someone who was mentally revisiting every conversation, every financial decision, every moment of the last 3 years. What else have you been lying about? That's when I realized I'd done more than just expose Dad's financial dependence on me. I'd lit a fuse that was connected to their entire marriage, and we were all about to watch it explode. Dad's face went through about 6 different expressions before settling on something between panic and rage. There's nothing else, Sarah. Don't let him turn this into something it's not. But Mom wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at me, and I could see the gears turning behind her eyes. What else, honey? She asked quietly. If you're burning it all down anyway, I need to know what else. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, and everyone was waiting to see if I'd jump. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to salvage what I could, to find a way to walk this back. But the part of me that had been swallowing humiliation for years was done being rational. The gambling, I said, and watched Dad's face go completely white. Jesus Christ, Uncle Pete muttered, and Aunt Carol actually gasped out loud this time. What gambling? Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. Dad was shaking his head frantically. It's not gambling, it's investments. I told you about the stock trading. $3,000 last November, I continued, pulling up another screen on my phone. When you called me crying about how you'd made a bad investment decision and the rent was due. Except it wasn't stocks, was it, Dad? The room felt like it was vibrating with tension. Jenny had actually put her hands over her ears like she could unhear what was happening. Marcus was texting frantically, probably warning other family members to stay away. You told me it was a one-time thing, I said, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. You swore you'd learned your lesson. But then February happened. And May. And August. Stop, Dad said, but it came out as more of a plea than a command. How much? Mom asked. She was standing now, and I could see her hands trembling. Total. How much gambling money? I looked down at my phone, at the numbers I tried so hard not to think about as actual money. Money I could have used for vacations, for a better car, for my own future. Money I'd handed over because I believed his sob stories about medical bills and cost of living and temporary setbacks. Approximately $8,000 over the past 2 years, I said. Always an emergency. Always the last time. Always with a story about how it wasn't really gambling, just bad luck or miscalculation or... Enough. Dad's roar cut through the room, and this time he did take a step toward me. You want to destroy me? Fine. You want to ruin everything? Congratulations. But don't you dare act like you're the victim here. Tom. Mom's voice cracked like a whip, but he wasn't listening to her anymore. You think you're so much better than me, he continued, his face red and spittle flying. So high and mighty with your college degree and your fancy job. You wouldn't have any of that without me. Without the sacrifices I made. What sacrifices? The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was past caring. You mean the sacrifices Mom made working double shifts to pay for my college while you bounced between jobs? Those sacrifices. That hit home. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, in the way several family members shifted uncomfortably. Because they remembered. They remembered Mom working herself to the bone while Dad figured things out and explored his options. That's different, he said weakly. Is it? I looked around the room at faces I'd known my whole life, people who'd watched this family dynamic play out for decades. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the same pattern. Mom sacrifices, I sacrifice, and you take credit when things go well and assign blame when they don't. The silence that followed was different from the others. This one felt final, like something breaking that couldn't be repaired. And that's when my phone rang. The ringtone cut through the silence like a fire alarm, and everyone in the room jumped. I looked down at the screen and my blood ran cold. Pinnacle Property Management. Dad's landlord. Calling me. At 8:47 p.m. on a Sunday during his birthday party. Answer it, Mom said quietly. She was watching Dad's face, and whatever she saw there made her voice turn to ice. Put it on speaker. Sarah, that's not necessary, Dad started, but I was already swiping to accept the call. Hello, this is David, I said, hitting the speaker button despite Dad's frantic head shaking. David. Thank God. This is Patricia from Pinnacle Property Management. I'm so sorry to call on a Sunday evening, but we have a serious situation with your father's apartment. The room went dead silent. Jenny was staring at Dad like she'd never seen him before. Uncle Pete had gone completely pale. What kind of situation? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. Well, he's now 3 months behind on rent. We've been trying to reach him for weeks, but he's not responding to calls or notices. The total amount due is $3,600, and unfortunately, we'll have to begin eviction proceedings tomorrow unless we receive payment. Mom made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. 3 months. 3 months while I'd been faithfully sending him $800 every month, believing it was going toward rent. I see, I said carefully. And you're calling me because... Your father listed you as his emergency contact and financial guarantor when he signed the lease. We have documentation showing you've made several payments on his behalf in the past. Of course he had. Of course I was on the hook for this too. Patricia, I said, aware that 23 family members were hanging on every word, I need to clarify something. My father has been receiving monthly assistance from me specifically for rent. Are you saying none of those payments made it to your office? Dad was frantically gesturing for me to hang up, his face cycling through panic, rage, and what might have been actual terror. No sir, we haven't received anything since September. The last payment we got was actually from you directly, if I'm reading this correctly. A bank transfer for $1,200 to cover August and September. August. Right after his latest, emergency, gambling loss when he'd sworn he'd learned his lesson. And since then? I asked. Nothing. We've sent multiple notices to the apartment, but honestly, we're not even sure he's been staying there regularly. The neighbors have mentioned the place seems empty most nights. The room was spinning. If he wasn't staying at his apartment, where was he living? My mind raced through the possibilities, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Patricia, I'm going to have to call you back, I managed. Of course, but please remember, we need payment by noon tomorrow or... I hung up and slowly raised my eyes to meet Dad's. He looked like a cornered animal. Where? Mom's voice was barely controlled. Have you been staying for the past 3 months, Thomas? The silence stretched until Aunt Carol made a small, horrified noise. Oh my God. Tommy, you haven't been staying at Sarah's house, have you? But Mom was already shaking her head, her face white with understanding. No. He's been staying at mine. The bottom dropped out of my world. My parents had been divorced for 2 years. Mom lived alone in a small apartment across town, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. And apparently, she'd been unknowingly harboring the man who'd been stealing from their son and lying to everyone about it. You told me it was just temporary, Mom whispered. You said the apartment was being fumigated. You said it was just a few nights. Dad opened his mouth, but no words came out. There were no words. No explanation that could make this okay. And that's when Uncle Pete stood up and said the words that would haunt me for weeks. David, son, I think you'd better check your credit report. Uncle Pete's words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Check my credit report. Why would I need to? The look on his face stopped me mid-sentence. As an accountant, Pete had seen every financial disaster imaginable, and the expression he was wearing now was pure professional horror. Dad, I said slowly, my voice barely steady. You didn't. But the way he couldn't meet my eyes told me everything I needed to know. The room seemed to tilt sideways as the implications crashed over me. What's he talking about? Mom demanded, looking between Pete and Dad. What credit report? My hands were shaking as I pulled up my banking app again, this time navigating to my credit monitoring service. I'd always been obsessive about my credit score, it was something I actually took pride in. Perfect payment history, low utilization, excellent rating. The page loaded and I felt the blood drain from my face. 7 new inquiries in the past 6 months, I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. Credit cards I never applied for. Jenny gasped. Marcus actually stood up like he was going to leave, then sat back down like his legs had given out. It's not what you think, Dad said desperately. I can explain. A Visa card from Chase, I continued reading, my voice getting louder. Capital One. Discover. Dad, what the hell did you do? I was going to pay them off before you ever found out. His voice cracked with panic. It was just temporary, until I got back on my feet. You make good money, your credit could handle it. You opened credit cards in my name. I was shouting now, beyond caring about the neighbors or family drama or anything else. That's identity theft. That's a felony. Mom had gone completely white. She was gripping the back of a chair so hard her knuckles were bone pale. Thomas, tell me you didn't commit fraud using our son's information. It's not fraud when it's family, Dad said weakly, but even he seemed to know how pathetic that sounded. Uncle Pete was shaking his head. Tommy, Jesus Christ, do you understand what you've done? Do you have any idea what this could do to his career? Government clearance, background checks. The room was spinning. My security clearance. My job required a high-level security clearance that I'd spent years qualifying for. Financial crimes, even as a victim, could jeopardize everything I'd worked for. How much? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Total balances. How much debt did you rack up in my name? Dad was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face. It's not that bad. Maybe 16,000. And I was making payments. $16,000. I looked around the room at my family members, these people I'd grown up respecting, looking up to. He stole my identity and racked up $16,000 in debt. Aunt Carol was crying too now. Jenny had her head in her hands. Marcus was typing furiously on his phone, probably updating the family members who'd been smart enough to skip this party. And the payments you were making, I continued, pieces clicking into place in my mind, those were coming from the money I was sending you for rent. I was trying to fix it, Dad pleaded. I had a system. I was going to get caught up and then tell you everything. When? Mom's voice cut through his rambling like a blade. When were you going to tell us, Thomas? When he got arrested? When he lost his job? When his credit was completely destroyed? The landline phone rang then, sharp and shrill in a tense silence. Mom walked over to answer it, probably grateful for any distraction from the nightmare unfolding in her living room. Hello. Her face went even paler as she listened. Yes, he's here. May I ask what this is regarding? She held the phone out toward me with a trembling hand. It's for you, she whispered. It's the fraud department from Chase Bank. I took the phone with hands that felt disconnected from my body. This is David. Mr. Harrison, this is Jennifer from Chase Bank's Fraud Prevention Department. We're calling about some unusual activity on an account linked to your social security number. Do you have a moment to verify some information? The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Dad had gone gray, like all the blood had drained from his face at once. Yes, I can talk, I said, putting the call on speaker. At this point, privacy was a luxury we'd abandoned about 10 revelations ago. We show a credit card account opened in March with your information, but the spending patterns are inconsistent with your other accounts. Large cash advances, ATM withdrawals in locations that don't match your residential or employment addresses. We've also noticed the payment method is unusual. Unusual how? The payments are being made from an account that appears to belong to a family member, but they're sporadic and often insufficient to cover minimum balances. We're showing late fees accumulating, and frankly, sir, this looks like either identity theft or some kind of financial abuse situation. Dad made a choking sound. Several family members turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from disgust to pure shock. The cash advances, I said carefully, where were they taken? I heard typing on the other end. Multiple locations. Several casinos in the area, some check cashing places downtown. The most recent was 3 days ago for $1,200 at Riverboat Casino. 3 days ago. 3 days ago, while I was carefully budgeting my own expenses and planning what I thought was a thoughtful birthday gift. Mom had sat down heavily on the couch, her face buried in her hands. The serving platter she'd brought out earlier was still sitting on the side table, the carefully arranged appetizers now seeming absurd against the backdrop of financial fraud and family destruction. Mr. Harrison, are you still there? I'm here, I managed. I need to report this as identity theft. Wait. Dad lurched forward, desperation making his voice crack. You can't do that. Do you know what that means? They'll press charges. I could go to jail. Uncle Pete stood up slowly, his face hard. Tommy, you should have thought about that before you decided to commit felonies. It's not like that. Dad was spinning now, looking around the room for anyone who might take his side. Tell them, Sarah. Tell them how hard it's been since the divorce, how I've been trying to get back on my feet. But Mom just looked at him with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, cold disappointment. Mr. Harrison. The voice from the phone pulled me back. If this is identity theft, we need to start the process immediately. Each day we wait makes it harder to resolve and does more damage to your credit. I looked around the room one more time. At cousins who couldn't meet my eyes. At aunts and uncles processing the scope of Dad's deception. At Mom, who looked like she was aging in real time as she realized how thoroughly she'd been lied to. At Dad, who was still looking at me like somehow I was the villain in this story. Yes, I said into the phone, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to report identity theft and fraud. Dad's knees actually buckled. He grabbed onto the back of a chair to keep from falling. Sir, I'm going to transfer you to our fraud specialist, but I need to warn you, once we start this process, it becomes a police matter. Are you prepared for that? I met Dad's eyes one last time. Yes. I'm prepared. That's when the front door opened, and my brother walked in. Hey everyone, sorry I'm late, Jake's cheerful voice cut off abruptly as he took in the scene. His smile faded as he registered the tears, the shocked faces, and the phone in my hand with a voice still talking about fraud specialists. What's going on? He asked, setting down a wrapped present that suddenly seemed obscene in the context of everything that had just been revealed. Nobody answered him. We were all frozen in this horrible tableau, Dad gripping the chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright, Mom staring at nothing, and me holding a phone that was about to destroy what was left of our family. David, the voice from Chase was saying. Are you ready for the transfer? Jake's eyes darted around the room, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. Someone needs to tell me what the hell is happening right now. Your father, Mom said quietly, not looking up, has been stealing from your brother. The words landed like a physical blow. Jake actually took a step backward, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror as he processed what Mom had said. Stealing. Jake's voice cracked. What do you mean stealing? Identity theft, Uncle Pete said grimly. Credit cards, fake accounts. We're talking felony charges. I watched my younger brother's face transform as the implications hit him. Jake had always been Dad's golden boy, the athlete, the charmer, the one who could do no wrong. He'd been spared most of Dad's criticism over the years, probably because he'd never challenged him the way I had. Dad? Jake's voice was small, like he was 12 years old again. Tell me they're wrong. Dad opened his mouth but nothing came out. What could he say? The evidence was overwhelming, the bank was on the phone, and I was about to file a police report. Sir. The Chase representative was still waiting. Should I proceed with the transfer? But before I could answer, Jake stepped forward and did something I never would have expected. Wait, he said, looking directly at me. Before you do this, I need to know something. He turned to Dad, his jaw tight. Is David the only one? The question hung in the air like poison gas. I felt my stomach drop as I realized what Jake was asking, what he might already suspect. What do you mean? Mom whispered, but her face suggested she was afraid she already knew. Jake pulled out his phone with shaking hands. I mean, I got a weird credit alert last month. My score dropped 15 points for no reason I could figure out. He was scrolling through his apps. I meant to look into it, but work got busy and I assumed it was a mistake. Dad made a sound like a wounded animal. Jake, no, I said, but he was already pulling up his credit report, his face getting paler by the second. 2 inquiries I didn't authorize, he said, his voice hollow. A MasterCard from First National, opened 6 weeks ago. He looked up at Dad with an expression of complete betrayal. Current balance, $3,200. The room exploded into chaos. Aunt Carol started crying openly. Uncle Pete was swearing under his breath. Mom actually gasped and pressed her hand to her chest like she was having heart palpitations. But it was Jake's reaction that broke me. My strong, confident younger brother just stood there staring at Dad like he was looking at a stranger, his phone hanging loose in his grip. Both of us, he said quietly. You did this to both your sons. Mr. Harrison. The voice from the phone seemed to come from another universe. We really need to proceed with the report. And sir. You might want to advise any other family members to check their credit immediately. I looked around the room at the faces of people I'd known my entire life, and realized that this was just the beginning. The silence after Jake's revelation felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane, deceptively calm while destruction swirled around us. I watched my brother stare at his phone screen, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen him wear before. 6 weeks, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. You've been using my identity for 6 weeks, and I never knew. Dad was shaking his head frantically. It was supposed to be temporary. Just until I could get the other cards paid down. I thought if I spread it out between both of you. You thought you could manage our identities like some kind of portfolio? I cut him off, incredulous. We're your sons, not your personal ATM machines. Mr. Harrison. The Chase representative's voice crackled through the phone speaker. I'm showing additional activity on this account. Are there other family members who might be affected? That's when Mom stood up abruptly, her face white as paper. Oh God. Oh my God. She was staring at Dad like she was seeing him for the first time. The mortgage refinance. What mortgage refinance? I asked, but the sick feeling in my stomach told me I didn't want to know. 6 months ago, Mom said, her voice getting higher. You said you found a better rate, that we could lower the payments on my house. You needed my information for the application. Uncle Pete's professional instincts kicked in immediately. Sarah, tell me you didn't give him access to your financial information. We were still married then, Mom said defensively, but her voice was shaking. Technically separated, but not divorced yet. He said it would help both of us if we could refinance. Mom, no, Jake breathed. I was already pulling up my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. What's your address again, Mom? I'm checking the county property records right now. Dad lurched forward. Don't do this. Please, just let me explain everything. Explain what? Jake's voice was rising, all traces of his usual calm demeanor gone. How you've been systematically destroying your entire family. How you turned us into criminals without our knowledge. The property records loaded and my blood turned to ice. Mom, sit down. What is it? She asked, but she was already sinking back onto the couch. Your house, there's a second mortgage. Taken out 4 months ago. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. For $75,000. The room erupted. Aunt Carol let out a small scream. Uncle Pete started pacing, muttering things that would make a sailor blush. Jenny and Marcus were staring at their own phones now, probably checking their own credit reports in real time. $75,000. Mom's voice cracked. Thomas, what did you do with $75,000? But Dad was beyond answering. He'd collapsed into the nearest chair, his head in his hands, making sounds that might have been sobs or might have been hyperventilation. The casino debts, I said, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. That's why you needed to keep borrowing from us. You weren't just gambling with the money we gave you, you were trying to dig out of a hole that was already massive. Jake was staring at his phone again, scrolling through screens with increasing panic. There's more. Jesus Christ, there's a personal loan here too. $8,000 from some company I've never heard of. Mr. Harrison. The voice from the phone seemed to echo from another dimension. We're going to need to involve multiple departments. This appears to be part of a larger pattern of identity fraud. How many family members are we talking about? I looked around the room at my cousins, my aunts and uncles, all of them now frantically checking their phones and wallets. And that's when I realized the most terrifying possibility of all. Everyone who came to Christmas last year, I said slowly. Dad, everyone who was at your Christmas party last year, did you have access to their information somehow? The look of absolute terror that crossed his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about Jake and me anymore. This was about our entire extended family. Uncle Pete was the first to break the horrified silence. His voice came out as a strangled whisper, the Christmas party. You asked everyone to put their coats in your bedroom. You were collecting coats, wallets, purses. No, Aunt Carol said, but she was already digging through her purse with frantic hands. No, no, no. Tommy wouldn't, he's family. Dad's face had gone beyond pale into a sickly gray color. He was opening and closing his mouth like he was trying to speak, but no words were coming out. Jake grabbed his laptop from his backpack and started typing furiously. I'm running a family credit check, he announced. If anyone has your social security numbers memorized, I need them now. Why would you need? Jenny started, then stopped as the implication hit her. Oh my God. Uncle Tommy, did you take pictures of our IDs at Christmas? The phone. Marcus suddenly shouted, making everyone jump. Remember? He kept asking people to use his phone charger upstairs, said the outlet down here wasn't working right. People were leaving their phones plugged in up there for like 20 minutes at a time. My mind raced back to that night. Dad playing the gracious host, so concerned about everyone's comfort, so helpful with the coats and bags and dead phone batteries. I thought it was weird how attentive he was being. Dad was never that considerate, but I chalked it up to holiday spirit. Photo access, I breathed. If people left their phones unlocked while they charged. Banking apps save login information, Uncle Pete said grimly. Photo galleries have pictures of checks, deposit slips, kids' social security cards for tax documents. Aunt Carol let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. My phone was up there for 45 minutes. I had to make calls for work, and the battery was completely dead. The Chase representative's voice cut through our panic. Mr. Harrison, I need to inform you that this conversation is being recorded, and based on what I'm hearing, we're legally obligated to involve federal authorities. This isn't just identity theft anymore, this is organized financial fraud involving multiple victims across state lines. Federal authorities. The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about family drama or even criminal charges anymore. This was FBI territory. Dad, Jake's voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes right before someone completely loses it. I need you to look at me and tell me the truth. How many people from Christmas are you using? Dad finally managed to speak, his voice barely audible. I never meant for it to go this far. It was supposed to be small amounts, things no one would notice. How many people? Jake roared, and I'd never heard my mild-mannered brother raise his voice like that in my entire life. 6, Dad whispered. Maybe 7. The room exploded into chaos again. Jenny was crying and scrolling through her phone simultaneously. Marcus was calling someone, probably his parents, warning them to check their accounts. Aunt Carol was hyperventilating into a paper bag that Mom had somehow produced. But it was Uncle Pete's reaction that scared me the most. He'd gone completely still, staring at Dad with an expression of professional horror. Tommy, he said quietly, do you understand what you've done? This isn't just theft anymore. With this many victims, this level of organization, the federal sentencing guidelines. He trailed off, shaking his head. What? Mom asked. Pete, what are you saying? Pete looked around the room at all of us, his family, his nieces and nephews, people he'd watched grow up, and his voice was heavy with dread. I'm saying Tommy's looking at 25 years to life. That's when Dad bolted for the door. Dad made it about 3 steps toward the front door before Jake tackled him. I'd never seen my brother move that fast. 1 second Dad was lunging for his escape route, the next he was on the living room floor with Jake's arm around his chest, both of them breathing hard. Let me go. Dad was thrashing like a trapped animal. You don't understand. They'll destroy me. My life is over. Your life. Jake's voice was pure ice. What about our lives? What about Mom's house? What about everyone in this room whose credit you've destroyed? Uncle Pete was already on his phone, probably calling 911. Aunt Carol was still hyperventilating, but now she was also frantically scrolling through her banking app, her face getting paler by the second. Oh God, she whispered. There's a withdrawal I didn't make. Last Tuesday. $400 from that ATM downtown. She looked up at Dad with pure betrayal. I thought it was a bank error. I was going to call them tomorrow to dispute it. Mr. Harrison. The Chase representative was still on the line, her voice cutting through the chaos. Sir, I need to inform you that we've just been joined by our security department and they're requesting immediate law enforcement intervention. That's when my phone started ringing. Then Jake's phone. Then Mom's landline. It's Capital One, Jake said, looking at his screen. Fraud department. Mine's Discover, I said. The landline was Mom's bank, I could hear her talking to them, her voice getting higher with each response. What do you mean unauthorized access? When? How much? This was spiraling beyond anything I could have imagined. What had started as me defending myself against Dad's public humiliation was now a federal crime scene with multiple banks involved. Everyone needs to stop and listen to me, Uncle Pete's voice cut through the noise with professional authority. Right now. Before the police get here. He looked directly at Dad, who was still pinned under Jake. Tommy, whatever you do in the next 5 minutes is going to determine whether you spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Dad stopped struggling. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to make a choice. Right now. Pete's accountant brain was clearly running damage control scenarios. You can cooperate fully, provide complete documentation of every account, every transaction, every penny you've stolen, and hope for a plea deal. Or you can keep lying and watch them build a case that'll put you away forever. But if I tell them everything, Dad started. If you tell them everything, maybe you get 15 years instead of life, Pete said bluntly. If you keep playing games, they'll charge you under RICO statutes for running an organized criminal enterprise. Jenny looked up from her phone, tears streaming down her face. Uncle Tommy, there's a credit card in my name I never opened. The balance is $12,000. Marcus was on his phone with someone, probably his bank. Mom. Yeah, you need to check your accounts right now. All of them. And call the credit monitoring service. He looked at Dad with disgust. He got you too, didn't he? That's when I realized the true scope of what Dad had done. This wasn't just identity theft, it was systematic financial abuse of his entire extended family. People who trusted him, welcomed him into their homes, shared personal information because he was family. The Christmas photos, Mom said suddenly, her voice hollow. You took pictures of everyone opening gifts. All those family photos with people holding up gift cards, showing off presents. Gift cards, I breathed, understanding flooding through me. The gift cards people got for Christmas, you photographed the activation codes. Dad's face crumbled completely. That was confirmation enough. How long? I asked. How long have you been planning this? But before he could answer, I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. The police were coming, and our family was about to become evidence in a federal fraud case. The sirens were getting louder when my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold. Unknown number, stop what you're doing right now or everyone will know about your little tax problem. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. What tax problem? I'd always been meticulous with my taxes, used a professional accountant, kept perfect records. What is it? Jake asked, still pinning Dad to the floor but watching my face. Before I could answer, another text came through, asterisk check your business filings for the consulting work you did last year. Guess who helped you set up that LLC, asterisk. My stomach dropped. The consulting work. I'd done some freelance projects last year and Dad had offered to help me set up the business entity. Said he knew someone who could handle the paperwork cheap, save me the lawyer fees. I'd been grateful for the help. Oh no, I whispered, pulling up my business account on my phone. No, no, no. What? Mom demanded, but I was already scrolling through transactions I'd never seen before. He didn't just steal from us as family members, I said, my voice barely working. He used my business license. There are transactions here, equipment purchases, business loans. I looked up at Dad with fresh horror. You've been running fake businesses using my credentials. Jake's grip on Dad tightened. What does that mean? Uncle Pete's professional pallor somehow got even worse. It means David could be facing criminal liability too. If there are business fraud charges tied to his license, his security clearance is gone. His career is over. The sirens were right outside now, and I could see red and blue lights flashing through the front windows. But all I could focus on was the growing list of fraudulent transactions on my business account. $43,000, I read off my phone. In business equipment purchases I never made, from companies I've never heard of. I looked around the room at my family members, all of whom were staring at me with growing concern. And it's all tied to my social security number, my business license. Another text came through, asterisk cooperate and I'll tell them you were a victim too. Don't cooperate and I'll make sure they know you were in on it from the beginning, asterisk. He's threatening me, I said, showing Jake the messages. Even now, even with police outside, he's still trying to manipulate the situation. Dad's voice came out as a croak, I was protecting you. If they think you knew nothing, you might avoid charges. Protecting me? I exploded. You destroyed my business. You used my professional reputation to commit fraud. That's when the front door burst open and 3 police officers walked in, followed by 2 people in suits who looked like federal agents. Nobody move, one of the officers announced. We have reports of an ongoing fraud investigation at this address. The room went dead silent except for Aunt Carol's quiet sobbing. 23 family members frozen in place while Jake sat on top of our father on the living room floor, surrounded by phones displaying evidence of financial crimes. One of the suited agents stepped forward. I'm Agent Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We've been monitoring unusual activity involving multiple financial institutions, and it appears to originate from this location. Agent Martinez's eyes swept the room, taking in a family gathering turned crime scene. We're going to need to speak with everyone individually, and I'm going to need all electronic devices secured as potential evidence. Evidence. My phone, my laptop, my business records, everything that proved my innocence could also prove my guilt if they decided Dad and I were working together. The agent looked directly at me. Are you David Harrison, owner of DH Technical Consulting? This was it. The moment that would determine whether I walked out of here as a victim or in handcuffs. I stood up slowly, acutely aware that every eye in the room was on me. Yes, I'm David Harrison. Agent Martinez pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what looked like financial records. Mr. Harrison, we have some questions about your business account activity. Specifically, a series of equipment purchases and loan applications that don't match your stated business operations. My mouth went dry. I just discovered those myself. I think my father. David, don't say anything without a lawyer, Uncle Pete interrupted sharply. Not one word. Agent Martinez's expression didn't change. That's certainly you're right, Mr. Harrison. But I should mention that we've been tracking this case for 6 weeks, and your business account has been central to our investigation. 6 weeks. My chest tightened as I realized that while I'd been sending Dad money and planning his birthday gift, the FBI had been building a case that could destroy my life. Agent Martinez, Mom spoke up, her voice shaky but determined. My son just found out about this tonight. We all did. Thomas has been lying to all of us. The agent turned to where Dad was still on the floor under Jake. And you are? Thomas Harrison, Dad mumbled. David's father. The primary account holder for the consulting business? No, I said quickly. I'm the sole owner. He just helped with the initial paperwork. Agent Martinez made a note on her tablet. Helped how, specifically? I felt the trap closing around me. Every answer could make things worse. He said he knew someone who could handle the LLC filing. I gave him the necessary information and he submitted the paperwork. Including your social security number, banking information, and authorization to act on behalf of the business. My stomach dropped. I signed some forms. I thought they were standard incorporation documents. David, Pete warned again, but Agent Martinez was already nodding like I'd confirmed something she already suspected. Mr. Harrison, those forms gave your father power of attorney over your business finances. Did you read them before signing? The room was spinning. I trusted Dad with the paperwork because I'd been swamped with work and he'd offered to help. I'd signed where he told me to sign, grateful that someone else was handling the bureaucratic nightmare. I skimmed them, I admitted, hating how naive that sounded. Agent Martinez exchanged a look with her partner. So you were unaware that your father had legal authority to make financial decisions for your business? Completely unaware. And you were unaware of the equipment purchases, the loan applications, the credit lines established in your business name? Yes. I mean, no. I wasn't aware of any of that until tonight. Jake shifted his weight, still keeping Dad pinned. Agent Martinez, my brother's been sending our father money for years. He's been victimized just like the rest of us. But the agent was studying her tablet again, and her expression wasn't encouraging. The timeline is interesting, though. Mr. David Harrison, your personal financial support to your father increased significantly around the same time the fraudulent business activity began. My blood ran cold. That's because he told me he needed more help with expenses. Or because you needed to launder more money through personal transfers to avoid detection. That's not what happened. I protested, but even as I said it, I could see how it looked from the outside. Increased personal payments coinciding with increased business fraud, all flowing through accounts I technically controlled. Agent Martinez's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked back at me with an expression that made my knees weak. Mr. Harrison, I'm going to need you to come with us for questioning. And I strongly advise you to contact an attorney immediately. That's when I realized that Dad's final manipulation might be his most devastating yet, making me look like his accomplice instead of his victim. The handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists, and I felt my entire world collapse. But then Jake's voice cut through the chaos with startling clarity. Agent Martinez, wait. You need to see something. He was still holding Dad down, but he'd managed to grab his laptop with one hand. I've been running forensic accounting software while you were talking. David, you need to see this. Agent Martinez paused, her hand still on my shoulder. What kind of software? I work in financial crimes investigation for the state, Jake said, and I've never been more grateful for my brother's boring job. Look at the transaction patterns. The agent studied Jake's screen, her expression shifting from suspicion to interest. Show me. Every fraudulent business transaction happens within 24 hours of David sending personal money to Dad, Jake explained, his voice gaining confidence. But look at the timing, the business fraud happens first, then David sends money. Dad would commit fraud, lose the money gambling, then call David with an emergency. I could see Agent Martinez processing this information, comparing it to whatever data she had on her tablet. More importantly, Jake continued, look at David's personal spending patterns. He's been living like a monk for 3 years. No vacations, no major purchases, driving a 12-year-old car. Every spare penny goes to Dad. Does that look like someone profiting from fraud? Uncle Pete stepped forward. Agent Martinez, I've been doing Tommy's taxes for 15 years. As his accountant, I can provide documentation showing his gambling losses far exceed any fraudulent gains. He's not a criminal mastermind, he's a compulsive gambler destroying his family to feed his addiction. Dad finally spoke from the floor, his voice broken. David didn't know anything. None of them did. I used his business license because I thought I could win it all back before anyone found out. Agent Martinez studied her tablet for a long moment, then looked at her partner. They had a whispered conversation I couldn't hear, but I caught the words, victim pattern, and gambling addiction. Finally, she turned back to me. Mr. Harrison, we're going to remove the handcuffs, but you're not free to leave yet. We need complete financial records, and you'll need to file formal victim reports with multiple agencies. The relief was overwhelming, but it was immediately replaced by a new realization: Dad was about to be arrested in front of our entire family. As if reading my thoughts, Agent Martinez approached Dad. Thomas Harrison, you're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. I watched them put handcuffs on my father while Jake finally stood up, his face grim. Mom was crying silently, and our extended family looked like they were attending a funeral. Dad, I said as they led him toward the door. He turned to look at me, his face streaked with tears. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. For the first time in my life, I actually believed him. But it was too little, too late. After he was gone, after the agents had collected our statements and secured our devices as evidence, after the cousins and aunts and uncles had quietly left to deal with their own financial disasters, it was just Jake, Mom, and me sitting in the destroyed remains of what was supposed to be a birthday party. You know what the ironic part is? I said, staring at the $500 gift card still sitting on the coffee table. He was right. It really was a pathetic gift. Jake shook his head. No, it wasn't. It was exactly what he deserved. Mom picked up the gift card, turning it over in her hands. After everything that's happened tonight, after all the money he stole, this gift card is probably worth more than anything else he'll get for the next 20 years. She was right. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something that might have been peace.